Black people were flying planes before the Tuskegee Airmen even existed. Welcome back to Black History and Photos, where we bring you the real, unsanitized photos America doesn't want you to see. Please subscribe to us and leave a like. This tells the algorithm we are building a great movement. Everyone knows about the Tuskegee Airmen, the legendary black pilots who proved themselves in World War II. But what they don't teach you is that black aviators were taking to the skies decades before Tuskegee, fighting racism and defying every limitation white America tried to impose on them. These pioneers didn't just fly planes. They shattered the myth that black people couldn't master complex technology, couldn't handle dangerous missions, couldn't compete with white pilots. Today, we're counting down 20 photographs of the black aviation pioneers who paved the way, the ones whose names were erased from history even though they changed it forever. Number 20, Eugene Bullard, the Black Swallow of Death. This photograph from 1917, preserved in the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum archives, shows Eugene Bullard in his French military uniform standing beside his fighter plane. Bullard was the first black military pilot in history, but he didn't fly for America. He flew for France, because America refused to let black men become pilots. Bullard was born in Georgia in 1895 and fled to Europe as a teenager to escape racism and violence. When World War I broke out, he joined the French Foreign Legion and fought in the trenches. After being wounded, he transferred to the French Air Service and became a fighter pilot, flying combat missions and shooting down German planes. The French called him the Black Swallow of Death. He flew over 20 combat missions, was wounded multiple times, and earned multiple medals for bravery. But when America entered the war and tried to recruit him into the U.S. Air Service, they rejected him because of his race. America would rather have no pilot than a black pilot, even one with proven combat experience. Bullard returned to France after the war and lived there for decades. During World War II, he worked with the French resistance, spying on German officers. He was wounded again and barely escaped when France fell. He returned to America and worked as an elevator operator in New York, his military service and aviation achievements completely unknown and unrecognized. It wasn't until 1994, 34 years after his death, that the U.S. Air Force finally commissioned him as a second lieutenant, acknowledging what France had recognized 80 years earlier, that Eugene Bullard was a hero and a pioneer. Number 918, Bessie Coleman, Queen Bess. This photograph from 1922, held in the National Air and Space Museum, shows Bessie Coleman standing beside her plane in her aviator gear. Coleman was the first black woman to earn a pilot's license, and she had to go to France to do it because no American flight school would accept her. Coleman was born in Texas in 1892 to sharecropper parents. She worked as a manicurist in Chicago and saved every penny to pursue her dream of flying. When American flight schools rejected her because she was black and female, she learned French and moved to France, where she earned her pilot's license in 1921. Coleman returned to America and became a barnstorming pilot, performing aerial stunts at air shows across the country. She was spectacular, doing loops, figure eights, and daring maneuvers that thrilled crowds. She refused to perform at any venue that segregated audiences, using her fame to fight racism. But Coleman's dream was bigger than performing. She wanted to open a flight school for black aviators, to create opportunities that had been denied to her. She was raising money for this school when tragedy struck in 1926. During a test flight, her plane malfunctioned and she was thrown from the cockpit, falling to her death at age 34. Bessie Coleman's legacy inspired generations of black aviators. The Tuskegee Airmen knew her story and were motivated by her courage. Every black pilot who came after her walked a path she had cleared with her determination and sacrifice. Number 18. Hubert Julian, the Black Eagle. This photograph from 1924, archived in the Schomburg Center, shows Hubert Julian in full aviator gear, standing beside his plane before attempting a parachute jump over Harlem. Julian was a showman, a daredevil, and one of the most famous black aviators of the 1920s and 30s. Born in Trinidad in 1897, Julian moved to Harlem and became a celebrity through his aerial stunts. He would fly over Harlem and perform dangerous maneuvers, drawing huge crowds. In 1924, he attempted to parachute from a plane over Harlem while playing the saxophone. The stunt didn't go as planned. His parachute got tangled and he crashed into a building, but he survived and became even more famous. Julian traveled to Ethiopia in 1930 and became a pilot for Emperor Haile Selassie. He trained Ethiopian pilots and flew combat missions when Italy invaded Ethiopia. He was a controversial figure. I feel flamboyant, self-promoting, and sometimes reckless, but he was undeniably skilled and brave. What makes Julian's story important is that he refused to let racism limit him. He lived boldly, flew dangerously, and demanded recognition. He wasn't humble or accommodating. He was loud, proud, and unapologetic about his abilities. In an era when Black people were expected to be invisible, Hubert Julian made sure everyone knew his name. Number 17. James Herman Banning. First transcontinental flight. This photograph from 1932, preserved in the Library of Congress, shows James Herman Banning and Thomas Allen standing beside their plane after completing the first transcontinental flight by Black aviators. Flying from Los Angeles to New York, Banning learned to fly in Iowa, where he was the only Black student at the flight school. After earning his license, he moved to California and worked as a mechanic and flight instructor. But white racism prevented him from getting commercial flying jobs. So he decided to make history instead. In September 1932, Banning and Allen took off from Los Angeles in a used plane they called Miss Ames. They had almost no money, so they would land in towns along the way and perform aerial stunts to raise money for fuel. The journey took 21 days and covered over 3,000 miles. When they landed in New York, they were greeted by thousands of people celebrating their achievement. They had proven that Black pilots could handle long-distance navigation, could maintain aircraft under difficult conditions, and could accomplish feats that many white pilots hadn't attempted. Tragically, Banning died in a plane crash just 9 months later at age 32. He was practicing for an air show when his plane malfunctioned. His transcontinental flight remains a landmark achievement in aviation history, but his name is barely known today. Number 16. Willa Brown, aviation educator. This photograph from 1938, held in the Chicago History Museum, shows Willa Brown in the cockpit of a plane. Brown was a pilot, flight instructor, and the first Black woman to earn a commercial pilot's license in the United States. Brown earned her private pilot's license in 1938 and her commercial license in 1939. She and her husband, Cornelius Coffee, established the Coffee School of Aeronautics in Chicago, training hundreds of Black pilots. Many of the men who would become Tuskegee Airmen received their initial training at Brown School. But Brown wasn't just a pilot and instructor. She was an activist who fought to integrate the military. She lobbied Congress to allow Black men to serve as military pilots, testifying before committees and organizing campaigns. Her advocacy was instrumental in the creation of the Tuskegee program. Brown also served in the Civil Air Patrol during World War II, becoming the first Black officer in the organization. She continued teaching and advocating for aviation opportunities for Black people throughout her life, training over 200 pilots and inspiring countless others. Number 15. Cornelius Coffee, master mechanic and pilot. This photograph from 1939, archived in the Smithsonian, shows Cornelius Coffee working on an aircraft engine. Coffee was not only a skilled pilot, but also a master aircraft mechanic who understood planes inside and out. Coffee earned his pilot's license in 1931 and his aircraft mechanic's license in 1933, becoming one of the first Black certified aircraft mechanics in America. He understood that Black aviators needed to master every aspect of aviation, not just flying, to prove their competence. With his wife, Willa Brown, Coffee established the Coffee School of Aeronautics, which became the primary training ground for Black pilots in the Midwest. The school taught not just flying, but also aircraft mechanics, navigation, and meteorology, providing comprehensive aviation education. Coffee's students went on to become Tuskegee Airmen, commercial pilots, and aviation professionals. His emphasis on technical excellence and his refusal to accept anything less than the highest standards prepared his students to excel in an industry that was determined to exclude them. Number 14. Janet Harmon Bragg, pioneering aviator. This photograph from 1933, held in the National Air and Space Museum, shows Janet Harmon Bragg beside her plane. Bragg was a nurse who became a pilot and spent decades fighting for opportunities for Black aviators. Bragg earned her pilot's license in 1933, training at the Aeronautical University in Chicago. She was one of the founding members of the Challenger Air Pilots Association, an organization of black aviators who supported each other and advocated for aviation opportunities. Bragg tried to enroll in the civilian pilot training program in 1939, but was rejected because of her race. She eventually completed the program, but was denied her commercial license by a racist examiner who refused to pass her despite her obvious competence. She finally earned her commercial license in 1943, after years of fighting discrimination. During World War II, Bragg tried to join the Women Air Force Service pilots, but was rejected because of her race. After the war, she continued flying and advocating for black aviators, eventually writing her autobiography to document the struggles and achievements of black aviation pioneers. Number 13. Charles Alfred Anderson, Chief Flight Instructor. This photograph from 1932, preserved in Tuskegee University archives, shows Charles Alfred Anderson, known as Chief, who would become the chief flight instructor for the Tuskegee Airmen program. Anderson earned his pilot's license in 1929, teaching himself to fly because no one would teach him. He bought a used plane and learned through trial and error, risking his life to master aviation. In 1932, he and Albert Forsyth completed a round-trip flight from Atlantic City to Los Angeles, proving black pilots could handle long-distance navigation. When the Tuskegee program was established, Anderson was hired as chief flight instructor. He trained the first class of Tuskegee Airmen and continued training pilots throughout the war. His students called him Chief out of respect for Bragg, his skill, and his dedication to their success. In 1941, First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt visited Tuskegee and asked Anderson to take her for a flight. Despite Secret Service objections, she flew with Anderson, and the photographs of that flight helped build public support for the Tuskegee program. Anderson's competence and professionalism convinced Roosevelt that black pilots deserved their chance to serve. Number 12. Albert Forsyth, Transcontinental Pioneer. This photograph from 1933, held in the Smithsonian Archives, shows Dr. Albert Forsyth standing beside his plane. Forsyth was a physician who became a pilot and completed multiple historic flights to prove black aviation competence. In 1933, Forsyth and Charles Anderson flew from Atlantic City to Los Angeles and back, completing the first round-trip transcontinental flight by black aviators. The following year, they flew from Miami to Nassau, Bahamas, completing the first international flight by black pilots. These flights weren't just personal achievements, they were political statements. Forsyth and Anderson were proving that black pilots could navigate long distances, handle challenging weather, and maintain aircraft under difficult conditions. They were dismantling racist assumptions about black capabilities. One flight at a time, Forsyth continued flying and advocating for black aviation throughout his life. He used his medical practice to fund his flying and his activism, never letting financial limitations stop him from pursuing his passion and fighting for justice. Number 11. John Robinson, the Brown Condor. This photograph from 1935, archived in the National Air and Space Museum, shows John Robinson in Ethiopia, where he served as commander of the Ethiopian Air Force during the Italian invasion. Robinson learned to fly in the Tuskegee Institute's aviation program in the 1920s, before the famous Tuskegee Airmen program existed. He became a skilled pilot and instructor, training other black aviators in Chicago. When Italy invaded Ethiopia in 1935, Robinson traveled to Ethiopia and joined Emperor Haile Selassie's forces. He trained Ethiopian pilots, flew combat missions, and helped organize Ethiopia's air defense. The Ethiopians called him the Brown Condor, in honor of his skill and bravery. After Ethiopia fell to Italy, Robinson returned to America and continued teaching aviation. He trained many of the men who would become Tuskegee Airmen, passing on his combat experience and his commitment to excellence. He died in a plane crash in 1954 while preparing for an air show. Number 10. Marie Dickerson Coker, Aviation Pioneer. This photograph from 1939, held in the Chicago Defender archives, shows Marie Dickerson Coker, one of the early black female pilots who fought for recognition in a field that excluded both women and black people. Coker earned her pilot's license in the 1930s and became active in the Challenger Air Pilots Association. She flew in air shows, competed in races, and advocated for aviation opportunities for black people and women. Like other black female pilots of her era, Coker faced double discrimination AGS, racism from white aviators and sexism from male aviators of all races. But she refused to be discouraged, continuing to fly and to fight for the right of black women to participate fully in aviation. Coker's generation of black female pilots created a foundation that later generations built upon. They proved that black women could master aviation, could compete with anyone, and deserved equal opportunities. Number 9. William Powell, aviation advocate. This photograph from 1931, preserved in the Los Angeles Public Library archives, shows William Powell, founder of the Bessie Coleman Aero Club. Standing beside his plane, Powell learned to fly in the late 1920s and became passionate about creating aviation opportunities for black people. He founded the Bessie Coleman Aero Club in Los Angeles, named in honor of the pioneering black female pilot, and used it to train black aviators and advocate for integration of the aviation industry. Powell organized air shows featuring black pilots, lobbied for black inclusion in aviation programs, and wrote extensively about the need for black people to master aviation technology. He understood that aviation represented the future and that black people needed to be part of that future. His advocacy helped create the political pressure that eventually led to the establishment of the Tuskegee program. Without pioneers like Powell fighting for opportunities, the Tuskegee Airmen might never have existed. Number 8. Dale White, breaking barriers. This photograph from 1938, held in the National Archives, shows Dale White, who became one of the first black pilots to earn a commercial pilot's license, and who fought throughout his life for integration of the aviation industry. White learned to fly in the 1930s and quickly became one of the most skilled black pilots in America. He competed in air races, performed in air shows, and consistently demonstrated that black pilots could match or exceed the performance of white pilots. White tried repeatedly to get hired by commercial airlines, but was rejected because of his race. Despite having more experience and better qualifications than many white pilots who were hired, he was told that passengers wouldn't accept a black pilot. He spent his career fighting this discrimination, filing complaints and advocating for change. It would be decades before commercial airlines finally integrated, long after White's flying career had ended. But his fight helped pave the way for the black pilots who eventually broke through those barriers. Number 7. Grover Nash, military aviation pioneer. This photograph from 1940, archived in the Air Force Historical Research Agency, shows Grover Nash, one of the black pilots who fought to integrate military aviation before the Tuskegee program was established. Nash learned to fly in civilian programs and applied repeatedly to join the Army Air Corps. He was rejected every time because of his race, despite having qualifications that exceeded those of many accepted white applicants. He filed complaints, wrote letters to Congress, and organized other black pilots to demand their right to serve. Nash's advocacy, along with that of other black pilots and civil rights organizations, created the political pressure that forced the military to establish the Tuskegee program. Without pioneers like Nash demanding their rights, the military might never have integrated. When the Tuskegee program finally opened, Nash was too old to qualify. He had spent his youth fighting for opportunities that he would never personally receive. But his sacrifice made it possible for younger black men to serve as military pilots. Number 6. Chanty Spencer, Goodwill Flight. This photograph from 1939, preserved in the Smithsonian Archives, shows Chanty Spencer and Dale White after completing their Goodwill Flight from Chicago to Washington, D.C., a flight that helped convince Congress to support black military aviation. Spencer and White flew from Chicago to Washington in a rickety plane that barely made the journey. They met with members of Congress, including Senator Harry Truman, and advocated for black inclusion in military aviation programs. Their flight and their advocacy helped build political support for what would become the Tuskegee program. Spencer later wrote about the challenges black pilots faced, documenting the racism and discrimination that made every achievement a battle. His memoir, Who is Chanty Spencer?, tells the Spencer, a story of black aviation pioneers and their fight for recognition and opportunity. Spencer lived to see black pilots integrate commercial aviation and rise to positions of leadership in the Air Force. He witnessed the fulfillment of dreams that seemed impossible when he was a young pilot fighting for the right to serve his country. Number 5. Thomas Allen, transcontinental navigator. This photograph from 1932, held in the Library of Congress, shows Thomas Allen, who served as navigator for the first transcontinental flight by black aviators alongside James Herman Banning. Allen was a skilled mechanic and navigator who understood aircraft systems and navigation techniques. His expertise was crucial to the success of the transcontinental flight, as he plotted courses, maintained the aircraft, and helped raise money for fuel along the way. The transcontinental flight proved that black aviators could handle complex navigation, could maintain aircraft under challenging conditions, and could accomplish feats that required both technical skill and courage. Allen's contribution to that achievement was essential. After Banning's death, Allen continued working in aviation, training other black pilots and mechanics. He understood that black people needed to master every aspect of aviation to overcome the barriers racism created. Number 4. Louis Pernell, aviation educator. This photograph from 1941, archived in the Tuskegee University collection, shows Louis Pernell, one of the early instructors in the Tuskegee program, who had learned to fly years before the military program was established. Pernell earned his pilot's license in the 1930s and became an instructor, training other black pilots in civilian programs. When the Tuskegee program was established, his experience and expertise made him a valuable instructor for the military pilots. Pernell represented the generation of black aviators who had fought for opportunities in the 1920s and 30s, and who then passed their knowledge to the Tuskegee Airmen. Without these civilian pioneers, the military program wouldn't have had qualified instructors or a foundation to build upon. Number 3. James Peck, international aviator. This photograph from 1932, held in the National Air and Space Museum, shows James Peck, who traveled to Europe to pursue aviation opportunities that were denied to him in America. Peck learned to fly in the United States, but couldn't find work as a pilot because of racism. He moved to Europe, where he flew commercially and built a successful aviation career. He flew in multiple countries, proving that black pilots could compete internationally. Peck's success in Europe highlighted the hypocrisy of American racism. He was good enough to fly in Europe, but not in his own country. His story, like Eugene Bullard's, showed that American racism was holding back talented people who could have contributed to American aviation. Number 2. Rufus Hunt, aviation mechanic and pilot. This photograph from 1937, preserved in the Chicago History Museum, shows Rufus Hunt working on an aircraft engine. Hunt was both a skilled mechanic and a pilot who understood that mastering aviation required technical knowledge as well as flying skill. Hunt trained at the Coffee School of Aeronautics and became one of the most knowledgeable aircraft mechanics in the black aviation community. He could diagnose and repair complex mechanical problems, keeping planes flying when parts and resources were scarce. Hunt's technical expertise was crucial to the success of black aviation programs. He trained other mechanics, maintained aircraft for black pilots, and ensured that planes were safe and airworthy. His behind-the-scenes work made it possible for other black pilots to fly and achieve their goals. Number 1. The Challenger Air Pilots Association. This photograph from 1931, archived in the Smithsonian, shows members of the Challenger Air Pilots Association, the first organization of black aviators in America, gathered with their planes. The Challenger Air Pilots Association was founded in Chicago in 1931 by black pilots who understood that they needed to support each other and advocate collectively for opportunities. The organization included many of the pioneers mentioned in this countdown: Cornelius Coffee, Willa Brown, Janet Bragg, and others. These pilots trained together, shared resources, advocated for each other, and fought collectively against racism in aviation. They organized air shows to demonstrate black aviation competence, lobbied for inclusion in aviation programs, and created a community that sustained them through years of discrimination and struggle. The Challenger Air Pilots Association represented the collective effort that made individual achievements possible. No black pilot succeeded alone, anymore. They all relied on a community of support, encouragement, and shared struggle. This photograph captures that community, showing black aviators standing together, united in their determination to fly despite every obstacle racism placed in their path. Now let me tell you why this history matters so much and why they tried to erase it. When the Tuskegee Airmen proved themselves in World War II, white America acted surprised, like black people flying planes was some kind of miracle. But black people had been flying for decades before Tuskegee. Eugene Bullard flew combat missions in World War I. Bessie Coleman was doing aerial stunts in the 1920s. James Banning flew across the country in 1932.